Shabbat Shalom. The poet James Cruz writes, I was lying on the couch in the middle of the morning, half in and half out of sleep. The day had barely begun, and already fatigue draped itself over me like a weighted blanket. Outside, spring had begun, and the warm sun slanted like a spill of honey across the floor. Yet, I could hardly lift myself into the shower. My daily cup of coffee had no effect. I felt excited about nothing. Having spent the past several months traveling back and forth across the country, climbing on and off planes for work, it had become clear I was facing burnout. After seeing his doctor and returning to therapy, Cruz realized what he needed: more rest. I needed long stretches of quiet that bring with them a sense of relief and release from the self. As I battled each day with the voices in my head that said I wasn't doing enough and I was just being lazy, I saw that rest itself could become a practice. What struck me most in reading this was the phrase, release from the self. What might it mean to release ourselves from ourselves? The Hebrew word that comes to mind is hefker, ownerless. To make ourselves hefker is to step even briefly outside the relentless project of being a self. Our Torah revolutionized the idea of rest, the wisdom of stopping, through the weekly practice of Shabbat, of course, and also through the rhythms of Shemitah and Yovel, which we encounter this week in Parashat Behar. Where Shabbat is a rest for the individual, Shemitah, observed every seventh year, is a rest for the land itself. Like our bodies, the land grows weary if it's constantly worked. The DNA of Judaism is the number 7, wrote Ismar Shorsh. Every time 7 appears in the Torah, it points us back to creation, to the truth that none of us is a self-made man or woman. We are forever indebted to our Creator, which means we can never be fully owned by another human being or by the things that we have made. Shemitah and Yovel are utopian practices, an attempt to return all of creation to its proper relationship with God. There are 4 mitzvot associated with Shemitah. First, the land must rest, which we read about in Leviticus 25:2. 2, all 7th year produce is hefker, ownerless and available to all. 3, all 7th year produce is sanctified. It cannot be bought or sold. And 4, all loans and debts are forgiven. In other words, every 7th year, we relinquish ownership. Shemitah and Yovel are spiritual technologies for practicing faith. Faith that God will provide enough to sustain us through the fallow years. Yovel, the Jubilee, arrives every 7 times 7 or every 50th year. It's a great reset, a leveling of the playing field, a restoration of dignity to those who have fallen behind. And the Torah knows how radical this demand is. Those who have will not want to give up what we have. If we let go of what we have, how can we be sure that we'll get what we need? If we leave the earth fallow, how can we be sure we'll have enough to eat? It is human nature to fear that we will not have enough. And it's human nature to fear that we are not enough. And so the Torah implores us to have faith, to trust that God will provide. That verse, Leviticus 25, Daber el bnei Yisrael v'amarta elchem, speak to Israelite people and say to them, Ki tavo'u el haaretz asher ani noten lechem, when you enter into this land that I'm giving you, v'shavta haaretz Shabbat la Adonai, and the land shall observe a Shabbat of Hashem. The Baal Shem Tov actually read this verse metaphorically, which I found fascinating. He said, bring rest and relaxation to the land, which is the body, and enjoy and rejoice over physical pleasures. Through this, the soul can rejoice spiritually. Shemitah and Yovel teach us to recognize our limits, the limits of the land, the limits of our bodies, the limits of our souls. This past January, Yehuda Kurtzer, the president of the Shalom Hartman Institute, wrote about a daring practice on the eve of his 50th birthday. In lieu of a midlife crisis, he committed to observing his own personal jubilee, building, in his words, a year-long sanctuary in time. He planned three things. 1, to let go of grudges. 2, to reduce his carbon footprint. And 3, to rest. He suspected that resting would be the hardest part. I wasn't surprised. Rest is hard for many of us, perhaps because we have been trained to believe that we are judged and will be judged for what we do, for what we produce. Most of us will not observe a full jubilee, and I missed the opportunity because I'm 52, but perhaps we can institute rest as a practice that reaches beyond our weekly Shabbat. We can, for example, declare a Shemitah on social media. We can let the outrage machine lie fallow. Right? Some applause for that. There's a time to plant, and there's a time for the earth to rest. There's a time to speak, and there's a time to hold our tongues. Karen Cinnamon wrote, your ancestors didn't survive millennia of persecution by being Instagram activists. They survived by loving each other, by building communities, by lighting their Shabbos candles, by refusing to disappear. You don't have to earn your place in Jewish history, she says. You're already in it, just by being here, just by being Jewish, just by choosing to live your life, your Jewish life, with joy. You are the continuation of everything that our ancestors fought to preserve. So I want to give us permission to take a rest for a moment, for standing up for what we believe in. Instead, rest. Enjoy a meal. Sit with a friend. Linger in a patch of sunlight. The headlines are real. And also the food that Dory cooked for us today that we're going to enjoy in a moment. I promise I'm almost done. That's also real. The May sunlight is also real. These times are calling upon us. They're demanding that we push, that we change, that we fight to build the world that we want our children to live in. And that work is crucial. It is crucial. But Shabbat and Shemitah and Yovel remind us hard work is not our only season, and driving ourselves is not our only setting. As James Cruz suggests, instead of trying harder, try softer. Try resting. Shabbat Shalom.